Very good evening to you. Do take a seat. Well, think with me about your Christian life. How has God been at work in you? How has God used your faith for his purposes? Would you say that your faith has been one of triumph, with great victories for God and his purposes, or one of trial, with hardships and challenges? Well, the original readers of Hebrews would have answered that last question very, very quickly, because they'd have said that their faith was probably one that was mainly full of trials. They were suffering for their faith, and in fact, they were so worn down, so lethargic as Christians, that some of them were tempted to pack in being a Christian altogether. I guess with us, at best, we'd say our experience of faith was mixed. Maybe you can think of triumphs where God has used your faith for his glory, for the good of others. Maybe you've led someone to Christ. Maybe you've been faithfully plugged into a ministry that God has used to bear fruit for him. But I'm sure you can also think of trials, times where maybe, if you're honest, it's been really tough to keep going in following Jesus. And that's why we need these verses in Hebrews chapter 11, because they show us that we should expect both triumphs and trials in our faith, but that there is something far greater to bank on beyond our present circumstances. And it's that greater reward that puts the trials and triumphs of faith in their proper place and helps us remember that though the Christian life may be harder, it is better. So we need God to help us. Let's pray together. Lord, we pray this evening that you would help us understand the triumphs and trials of the life of faith, but also to see beyond them to the final reward you promise us. For Jesus' sake, amen. So firstly, we see the triumphs of faith, the triumphs of faith. Reading from the start of our passage for this evening, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put armies to flight. Women received back their death by resurrection. So the sense here is that this author of Hebrews could have continued. He could have listed perhaps many more examples of faithful men and women of God. Who have we got here? Well, the four judges who are mentioned conquered kingdoms. They delivered God's people from oppressors. They restored God's faithless people back to him. King David unified the people of God. He defeated God's enemies. And it's to David and his descendants that God promised the once and for all King, the Lord Jesus. Stopping lions, quenching fire, maybe that's Daniel and his friends. Women being brought back from the dead, maybe that's the miracles of Elijah and Elisha. Spectacular things. But as with the whole chapter, all of Hebrews 11, the author is saying that it's God who is behind these spectacular things. So the people that are listed here aren't some sort of spiritual elite, and that's reinforced by the examples that are named for us. They're far from perfect people. David was an adulterer and a murderer. Samson's life really was a catalogue of disaster. Jephthah made an idiotic vow that cost his daughter her life. And that's the point. Now, sin is not okay, but God still uses idiotic people capable of doing idiotic things, like you and like me. And of course, these verses aren't primarily about people. They're about faith. And they're about faith in God and what faith in God makes possible. So like we said, the original readers of Hebrews were fed up. Some of them wanted to pack in being a Christian altogether. And one danger when you feel like that is that you become a bit of a spiritual Eeyore. So I'd imagine that the Hebrews had become cynical, that they'd forgotten how God could use them and their faith, even with its suffering, for his good and for his glory. Of course, they couldn't bank on God using them in that way. They couldn't bank on God using them in any particular way. There's no promise that says, suffer like this, and I'll do this for you. But that doesn't mean that God can't and won't use ordinary faith in flawed, weak people to do extraordinary things. And I think we often forget that. A while ago, one of us was plugging away and sharing the gospel with a friend. This friend eventually responded to an invite that came along here to church. But this friend walked out of the service and he said, I don't like this message. I'm never coming back. I don't want to talk about any of this stuff ever again. But they did talk about it again, and that led to difficult, hostile, aggressive conversations with that friend, and then eventually the whole kind of group of friends. So one minute someone's thanking God that a friend has come to church, and the next they're fielding hostile objections to the gospel. And when we face hostility like that, the danger is that we shrink back, we become demotivated. We think, I won't invite anyone to church because they won't come, and even if they do come, well, sooner or later they just won't want to know about any of the gospel anymore. When in God's sovereignty they might come. They might come, and they might respond positively. We think, what's the point of inviting someone to Christianity Explored? They won't be interested. They will become a Christian. When it might be God's plan that they give it a go and that they come to trust in him as they look at the Jesus of the Bible. So the writer to the Hebrews is reminding fairly worn down, discouraged, suffering Christians, ordinary Christians like us, that God can use their faith for his good purposes. That's why we've got these positive examples, to show what God can do through the faith of his people. Now, of course, the Hebrews could not bank on it. Faith doesn't guarantee triumph. Faith doesn't guarantee any form of success. It doesn't guarantee us victory in this life. But God, through the ages, has always used flawed people for his good purposes, and he can with us. And perhaps, friends, we need this reminder at the minute when COVID has, at the very least, been discouraging for church life. And despite all the good that we know about, all the good that we are involved in, all the good that we see, perhaps deep down we feel our witness, we feel that our ministry here seems weak and seems ineffective. But God is doing great things among us. That person I mentioned kept going, and later down the line brought different friends to church who heard the gospel. People are coming to faith among us through our witness, through all that we do. We celebrated that in a baptism service only a few weeks ago. Some of us are looking into the message of Jesus for the very first time. If you're here and you put yourself in that category, you're very, very welcome. You're very welcome to do that in your time, on your terms. We're just here to help you and to support you as you do that. God has led us to plant 2 churches in just over 10 years. So many of us keep going, keep coming, are great examples of loving and encouraging one another in really significant, really meaningful ways. I could go on. God is powerfully at work. He is at work among us and in us and through us. And he can do more. He can do more than we ask or think or imagine among us. So as the missionary William Carey famously said, expect great things from God, attempt great things for God. That is the life of faith. It won't always be easy. And though we can't bank on it, God can use us to do great things for him. The question is, are we prepared to do that? But secondly, we see the trials of faith. The trials of faith. Because in the middle of verse 35, almost mid-breath, there's a shift in tone. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and in caves of the earth. That is a horrible list of suffering for following God, from prison to flogging to torture through to horrible death. It's hard to know the exact people the writer has in mind here. It obviously doesn't really matter, otherwise he would have told us, wouldn't he? But I traced some of these themes back through the Old Testament. I came across the story of the prophet Uriah. He was around after King David, and he had a warning of judgment for the people of Israel. The people of Israel had faithlessly moved away from God. And their response to Uriah's message of judgment was to kill him. He was killed by the sword of the evil King Jehoiakim. That's all we know pretty much about Uriah. Obedience and faith for him led to a death, a terrifying death. Where someone like King David, well, he had hard times, yes, but he experienced great spiritual triumphs, ruling over God's people in God's promised land. So what's the difference between David's faith and the faith of the prophet Uriah? Nothing. There's no difference, because the writer's point here is that there is not any difference between the faith of those in verses 32 to 34 or those listed from the middle of verse 35. God was equally faithful to David as he was to Uriah. God was equally faithful to Gideon as he was to the prophet Isaiah, who tradition says was sawn in two. God was equally faithful to all of them. And verse 39, which we'll come on to, shows that all were commended for their faith. All will experience the rewards of faith. It's just that their experience of the life of faith was very different. So the Hebrews, the original readers of this letter, had been crushed by their trials and suffering. And they were probably sat there thinking, we've been so faithful to God, but look what he's allowed to happen to us. And the writer is saying, look, you can't expect to take a stand for God and expect that that will always result in triumph. There won't always be victory for you. That simply isn't something that God promises. And I think we need to remember that too. It's why the prosperity gospel message of follow God, give to God, and life will be happy and successful is so wrong and so dangerous. Because it is not what God promises. It's not what Christians in the past have experienced. And it's not what Christians in the present experience. Maybe the intense suffering of verses 35 through to 38 can seem a little bit hard for us to relate to. And if that's the case, I gently want to say that we need to wake up to the fact that this is the reality for some of our brothers and sisters around the world. Like a lady called Shanti I was reading about recently. Shanti lives in India. She became a Christian in her 50s. Soon after that, her whole family came to follow the Lord Jesus. She was rejected by her wider family, by her extended family. As soon as she'd come to faith, she had to move village, but persecution followed until one day her and her family were beaten up by Hindu extremists. They were later wrongly arrested and accused of forcibly converting people in the village. And the police refused to listen to any pleas of innocence and, in fact, shockingly beat them even further. Listen to some of Shanti's response after being released from prison. I have experienced the love and peace of Christ in my life. I have been to temples, but all Christ wanted was my heart. My family and I can never leave Christ for the mere pressures of humans. When Christ himself was rejected by his own, what are we? The Bible warns us we will face persecution, so we are prepared for any situation. Worse may happen to us. Shanti's faith in Jesus sounds vibrant. It sounds inspiring, doesn't it? But it's a faith that knows that persecution can be expected. It's a faith that has lived through persecution for following Jesus. So when we share the gospel and we get a negative reaction, even a terrible reaction, when we try to be faithful to Jesus only to feel like our lifestyle is viewed as odd and awkward rather than attractive and distinctive as we might hope. When we take a stand for Jesus in the workplace or with friends, only to find that it makes no difference at all. In fact, all it's done is brought us further trouble. When we face much, much worse, we'll be prepared. We'll know what to expect. Because faith doesn't guarantee a life free from suffering, doesn't guarantee a life free from trial. The Bible is realistic. It tells us what to expect, and to be blunt, it tells us just how bad it can get. So instead of being caught off guard, instead of wallowing in self-pity like Shanti, we'll look to the God behind our present circumstances. And above all, we'll look beyond our present circumstances to an entirely different eternal future. So thirdly, the promise of faith. The promise of faith. Verses 39 and 40. And all these, that's the previous people, the previous examples of faith, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. So these verses are saying that none of these people, whether they had a life of faith that consisted of amazing triumphs or one that consisted of terrible trials, none of them received in their lives all that faith promised. What God promised was complete restoration to him. He promised that the barrier of sin would be defeated forever, the penalty of sin would be defeated forever, and that barrier between us and God would be destroyed by the Lord Jesus, who died on the cross. And so if you believe that, and that's what you need to believe if you're to call yourself a Christian, God promises that one day you'll be with him in a perfect world, free from sin and free from all that sin spoils. So every believer throughout the ages will enjoy heaven together, and Jesus will rule perfectly, and he will rule unopposed. And this is what the life of faith is all about. This is the ultimate end point of the promise for us. If we trust in Jesus, one day we'll be with him forever. And so that's why in verse 5, those who were tortured refused to accept release. In other words, they refused to give in. They did not give up on their faith because they knew that trusting in God meant rising again after death to a better life with God in heaven. And that's a game changer. Because it puts the life of faith with its ups and its downs into perspective. Into the perspective not just of the here and the now, but of the great overarching promise of heaven at the end of this life, if we trust in the Lord Jesus. So King David, with God in heaven, will look back to his rule, the high point of the nation of Israel, sat on the throne in splendor, and he will say, that wasn't so great. It doesn't compare to this. Because what in this life, even the triumphs of faith, could ever compare to being surrounded by God's people and enjoying God's rule, his presence, his love forever? And the prophet Uriah or Shanti or any one of us who has or will suffer for our faith, when we're with God in heaven, we'll look back at trials, even terrible trials, and say, that wasn't so bad. It doesn't compare to this. Because suffering for God will make perfect sense when we see face to face just how powerful and righteous and true and loving he is. And then there will be no doubt at all that it was worth it. So why would you give up following Jesus? Even if you faced terrible suffering, if you knew that what was promised was something far, far, far better for you, something beyond compare. See, friends, it's only when we look to the world to come that we really learn not to be too buoyed by the highs of this life, even the triumphs of faith, leading a friend to Jesus, running a flourishing small group, whatever spiritual success might look like for you, or whether it's success at work, the gift of a family, whatever it might be. Yes, we can be joyous. Yes, we can be thankful to God for all he has given to us and all the ways he has blessed us. We must remember, one day it will not compare. And only when we look to this great world to come will we find that we're not too crushed by the lows that this life throws at us, even the particularly hard lows that being a Christian may bring. Because one day they won't compare. I don't know about you, but I'm so thankful to God for the life of faith that he has given me. Isn't it true that faith brings with it triumph? But yes, it brings with it tough trials. Even though the Christian life is harder in the life of faith, the end point is the promise of heaven. And it's that we're banking on in the here and the now. And as it says in verse 40, that really will be better for us. Let's pray. Father, among us this evening will be those of us who have experienced great triumphs in faith, and those of us who have experienced great trials, perhaps even experiencing those right now. However, for most of us, our experience of the life of faith is a mixture of trials and triumphs. But we rejoice in the fact that there is something better for us, that the Christian life promises a greater reward, that when we're with you forever in your kingdom of glory. And we ask this evening that for your Spirit you would fix our eyes on that we would know better where we're going, and that would sharpen and change our perspective on our triumphs and our trials in the here and the now. For Jesus' sake, amen.